The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
When you think about evaluation criteria to actually minimize this budget risk, well, what can we actually do? That's another common question as well here. So the way we do this is we have a tool called XPD, or Expertise Project Delivery. And what this looks at is what it sounds like, the risk and the value that can potentially come up on a particular project. So our normal example of this is a new dorm. This is an actual project where our scope of work is to build out a new student dormitory, right? The issue here that all the companies that proposed identified that, well, based on the numbers we've identified, your budget, what you're asking for can't actually be done. There's not enough money available for that. So there's a couple firms that came in. Firm one that said that by optimizing the building location, using hybrid design, better design processes, we can deliver something great, right? And of course, as we look at that, that's not very tangible. It's not very specific in terms of our ability to provide something that is useful for that. Second example, company number two, same issue, not enough money. The owner can be assured that the budget's not a risk. You can be assured of that. They have a world-class team, lots of connections, and we'll take care of it, right? I mean, when you look at that, it kind of feels like they'll say whatever you want to hear to get the project, right? So when you think about how do we minimize the budget risk here, what I would do and what we do in this XPD process is have the vendors identify, here's what our risk is, here's what we see as risk, and here's how we're going to minimize the risk of, for example, not having enough money. So ask yourself here, is that based on these first two examples, does this actually minimize the risk of not having enough money? And the answer is no. It's kind of marketing, right? Okay, same project, third firm, here's what they said. By, oops, sorry, that's again, not good. That's why we don't like that. Third firm, they said the budget cannot accommodate the building program based on what you've asked for. There's ways to deliver your program based on the budget that you have. Take out the underground parkade, $2 million of savings. Change out some of the finishes, $67,000 of savings. And then some other changes in the design program, savings of about $1.6 million. See, what we find here is that when you start asking the vendors of what risk do you see and how are you going to minimize that, now we're really getting down to the core of what we can do here, right? This is the value in looking at risk and value and understanding what can be done with this particular project. Here's an IT example. In this particular project, again, we provided the budget to them. This firm came back and said, well, in your scope of work, you have asked us to provide what are called named licenses for every single person in your organization. And this firm, when we asked them to think about what risk do you see with this budget, they said, well, in our experience, you don't need a named license for everybody because not everybody's going to use the software at the same time. So we have a different program called concurrent licenses where you basically check out a license for the software, you use it, and when you're done with it, it goes back into the pool of available licenses. So by doing this, we can save 30% in your overall cost. See, by providing that budget number and understanding what your available money is here, they can now start thinking about better, more efficient ideas. Let's take another example here. This is a new high school. This happens to be just another construction example, but this really illustrates why this is that on this particular site, as you all may know, when you go to a site that we're not very familiar with the existing conditions, and particularly water pressure on site. So what this firm had done as part of this value-added risk plan in this process is say, well, we won't know what the overall water conditions of the site are until about a month into the project. And there's really 3 different outcomes that could happen here. The best case is that there's plenty of water pressure, no impacts to your budget. The second case, most likely case here, is that there's not enough water and we'll have to change some of the building parameters. In other words, make the building smaller because you're going to have to reallocate funds to increase the overall water pressure to the site. Or the worst case is that there's no water pressure available and we'll have to do a lot of underground work to resolve and deal with these issues. So the firm came in, identified these scenarios here, and they actually awarded the contract to this firm and they got started. Well, fast forward a month into the project, they start digging in, and guess what? It is option 2. Now compare that if you were the buyer or the owner of these services, you got into the project and realized that there is an issue and you had to tell the owner about, hey, there's this issue. You're not going to be able to get as much project done with this. That's a significant concern. So what we're seeing here is that by minimizing surprises, that's a really good thing. Because at the end of the day here, this helps minimize the surprises, and we don't like surprises on projects, right? Okay. My last example of the value in sharing the budget, and we'll open this up for discussion and questions here in a minute, but this is another real example of an organization that didn't want to share their budget and the impact of this. So what they were doing is this owner was hiring based an engineering firm to design a 9,000 square foot data center. So it's relatively small, but they had to design out this whole data center. And as part of our work with them, we recommended, well, let's include your budget with this, tell the vendors what it is, the engineers, and that's what we should do. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to provide the budget, because the reason why is that we don't trust the industry and they're just going to inflate their prices and cause problems for us. So the very first question that the engineers, the proposers ask is what? What's your budget? So they asked for the budget, the client doesn't provide it. Only 2 firms submitted on this. Both firms describe a facility that will be way over the budget that the clients knew, but they didn't tell anybody else. So now they got a problem. So the client selects one firm and has them design the project. They still don't trust them, so therefore they say, well, our budget is somewhere between $1 and $5 million. We trust you a little bit now, but we're going to give you a range because we still don't trust you. What do you think the firm's going to do based on this information? They design it at $4.5 million. So it's within their range. This is what they told them, right? So then what the client does is they say, well, actually, our budget is $1.5 million. So if you're the client here, what are you doing, right? I don't have a lot of hair left here, but if I did, be pulling out my hair, right? This is what this is, right? Think about all the time and effort and just frustration that go into dealing with this. The fact that had they told the industry what their budget numbers were, this could avoid all this back and forth here, and really avoided these issues in the first place, right? So the value in providing the budget, and the key thing with all of this is, perhaps illustrated by this last example, is that in some cases you have more money than you need here, and when you really start focusing on the key principles of what happens, here's what we see with this. In this particular case here, the scope of work for this project was to re-roof the building. All right, that was the scope of work. They provided the budget. The contractors they came in here and said, well, for additional, actually what the first thing they said is here that your scope of work is to re-roof the building. That's the scope. Now, for anybody that's ever done roofing work or facility management before, what's really the key of why we're getting a new roof? It's not for the sake of getting a new roof, right? It's to stop water leaks in our building here. So what the contractor said is, yeah, we'll re-roof your building, but that's not going to stop all of your leaks. And they said because of all these other issues in the masonry, in the windows, and other caulking issues, this is going to cause lots of problems. So for some additional time and money, we can go in here and fix all these other issues up. And hopefully what this is illustrating is that when we start focusing on the key differences and really focus on expertise and using or leveraging that expertise, this allows us to go in here and identify those experts. And that budget is absolutely a crucial part of encouraging and using the expertise of your vendors that you're looking to hire here. Okay, so let's take a pause here. And are there any questions or comments or concerns at this point in time. What do we all think here? Does it make sense? Does that seem reasonable?
Jake, I had received a couple chats asking about providing a range. I know you showed that example there, which is a not so great example, but I think some of the concerns that I got in the chat were, well, what if our cost is $100,000, but the vendor's cost is 115, and we share our budget? Are they just going to walk away? Or maybe we give a range, and that encapsulates a larger area, so we're increasing our chances that they're not going to walk away. So that maybe we can chat about that a little bit, the pros and cons of adding a range. So one, it can turn out in the worst possible way, like that example where Shane in the chat is exactly right. You're wasting the vendor's time. You're basically, if you provide a range, you're just injecting confusion because you're allowing vendors to make different assumptions. And so at minimum, what it's going to do is make your proposals, they're no longer apples to apples, because there's no way that every vendor is going to make the same assumption. So just from an evaluation standpoint, we're hurting ourselves. I would tell you that if your range happens to be below the actual cost that the vendors have, well then whether you provided a range that was too low or a single number that's too low, you're still too low and you still have the risk of them walking away. So what Jake's advocating for is you provide the budget, but do it in a way that you're encouraging the right kind of proposal response, a risk-based proposal response where the client recognizes that their budget may not be perfect. And you're basically using that as a tool, as that's your plea to the vendor community that, look, here's our budget, but we may not be right. And you're the expert, so flag that for us, provide justification, provide options, provide solutions. Because if we're in that scenario where we don't have enough money, we want vendors to come in who know their stuff to justify that, give us those options, and ideally do that right up front in their initial proposal. So we're getting all the best ideas from across all of the proposals, right? We don't want to get down the road and be locked into one and trying to figure it out. I know some folks in the chat mentioned that, well, if we don't have enough money, we can always go back and ask for more. But how much easier is that to do when you have unanimous feedback from the industry showing you, here's the justification of why we're too low, or here's why our numbers are higher from a proposer's standpoint. And you can use that to go and have now justification to ask for that additional amount of money. You know exactly how much, and you didn't have to go back and forth for updates and questions. It was right there in the beginning. And it has the extra purpose of helping you see who the true experts are who identified it. So I think that would be the long rambling answer on ranges and how it can be used to your advantage. Brent, I think I see you had a point to make as well.
I think that we need to remember too, that at some point in time, we're going to be partnering with one of these companies. And if we waste their time and piss them off and give them a bunch of false information, then we think we don't trust them up front. They're not going to trust us for the balance of the project. So we're already in a hole. So in my opinion, the more information we give them up front so that they can be real with us, we will immediately weed out the vendors we don't want to deal with by their responses. If our budget is too low, we want to work with the one who comes back and says, you know what, your budget's low, but we can do this, this, and this, and we can come in here, we can do these things. Now we have a partnership going on, and that's what we want.
Absolutely.
We're the idiots. We don't know the industry. We need to trust them to give us the proper answers based on our true parameters.
I think that's a great comment, Brent. Thank you. We also have a suggestion here too in the chat box of anticipated budgets, and that's part of the transparency part of things. That if you have a number that is not yet approved or something you're waiting to hear back on, I would again provide whatever information you have about what this is. I think in some ways ranges, like providing budget ranges, are perhaps more detrimental than providing the actual numbers, because if we have a range but we know it's really not at the upper limit, then that's perhaps not being fully disclosed about what the actual numbers are. Now, I had a project once where it was basically a renewal program for parks and some construction work where the bond had not yet been approved. It was likely going to be approved. Everything was pointing towards that, but in the RFP, this is what we said. It's likely that the bond will be this. Here's the timelines. Here's how that's going to work. But it's very transparent about here's what we anticipate happening with that. Awesome. Corey, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I think we just, we ran into this a little bit with, we're building a $20 million building, and we kind of weren't up front with the architect. We kind of gave him a list of kind of what we would like to have in this building. And architects, they will design to make themselves look good and show their skills, right? So I think architects, we've learned very quickly, we need to keep them in a box, and the budget keeps them in a box. But what we learned with big GCs and big CMs that we've been dealing with is we want them, we put a lot of trust and expertise to the architect to put out a good bid spec along with kind of the specs we have internally. And we put GCs and CMs out on that bid spec and say, you bid it to the bid spec, but give us some great VE options that brings the best value to kind of what you guys can bring. And that really, the VE options and how they think through the process and a good logistics plan, you really can separate the good from the bad pretty quickly. It's pretty clear when companies really want the job and they have the skill to do it. That's kind of what we've learned recently with some recent projects.
Awesome.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.